The fracture between Brooke and Katie did not begin with raised voices or public accusation. It began quietly, in the aftermath of Eric's departure from Forrester Creations, when something fundamental shifted beneath the surface of the Logan family. Brooke felt it immediately, a subtle but unmistakable sense of displacement, as though a cornerstone of her identity had been moved without her consent. For decades, the name Logan had been intertwined with Forrester not merely as a rival, but as a legacy shaped by shared history, sacrifice, and compromise. Brooke had fought, loved, lost, and rebuilt herself within those walls. When Eric stepped away from Forrester Creations, it did not feel like a business decision to her. It felt like an abandonment that reverberated through every memory she associated with that world. And when she learned that Katie was not only continuing forward with her own fashion house, but doing so under the Logan name, Brooke's unease hardened into something far more dangerous. Brooke confronted Katie privately at first, her tone controlled but edged with hurt. She questioned the intent behind the branding choice, asking why the Logan name, so deeply bound to family unity, was now being positioned as a banner for separation. To Brooke, it felt like an erasure of shared struggle, a rewriting of history that cast her as irrelevant. She accused Katie not of ambition, but of betrayal, suggesting that the timing was too precise to be coincidental. Eric's exit, Forrester's vulnerability, and Katie's sudden confidence combined into a narrative Brooke could not ignore. She felt sidelined not only as a sister, but as a matriarch whose emotional investment had been taken for granted. Katie did not respond defensively. She listened, absorbing the accusation, with a composure that only deepened Brooke's frustration. When Katie finally spoke, her words were measured, deliberate, and resolute. She explained that using the Logan name was not an act of appropriation, but reclamation. For years, she had lived in the shadow of larger personalities, her contributions diluted by louder voices and more dramatic arcs. Logan, to her, represented resilience, survival, and the quiet strength of women who rebuilt themselves without spectacle. This was not an attack on Brooke, nor a calculated strike against Forrester. It was an assertion of identity. Yet Brooke heard only justification, not remorse, and the distance between them widened. The true rupture came when Katie made her announcement public. At a carefully staged press conference, she revealed that Eric Forrester would serve as the lead designer for Logan. The declaration landed like an earthquake. Reporters reacted with stunned excitement, their questions tumbling over one another as they grasped the implications. Eric Forrester, the patriarch synonymous with Forrester Creations, aligning himself with a rival house, one bearing the Logan name, was a seismic shift in the fashion world. For Brooke, watching the announcement unfold in real time, the shock was visceral. This was not merely business. This was personal history repurposed without her consent. Brooke did not hesitate. She arrived at the press conference unannounced, her presence commanding immediate attention. Cameras pivoted instinctively toward her, sensing conflict before a word was spoken. Brooke's entrance transformed the room from a corporate event into a battleground of legacy and loyalty. She confronted Eric publicly, her voice steady but charged with emotion. She demanded to know how he could align himself with a brand that stood in direct opposition to the family he had built. Her words carried the weight of years, of marriages endured and dissolved, of alliances tested, of forgiveness extended and withdrawn. To Brooke, Eric's decision was not just a professional betrayal, but a personal rejection of everything they had weathered together. She turned her focus sharply toward Katie, accusing her of exploiting Eric's vulnerability and the transitional chaos at Forrester to elevate her own brand. Brooke framed Katie's move not as empowerment, but opportunism, suggesting that she had capitalized on fracture rather than forging something independent. The accusation was brutal in its clarity. Brooke spoke of loyalty as though it were a finite resource, one Katie had chosen to redirect for personal gain. The press, sensing the magnitude of the confrontation, leaned in, recording every word, every tremor of emotion, every glance exchanged between the sisters. Eric attempted to intervene, his voice calm but strained. He explained that his decision was not rooted in resentment or defiance, but in creative stagnation and a desire for renewal. He spoke of wanting to design without constraint, to return to the essence of his craft rather than the politics that had come to dominate it. He insisted that Katie had not coerced him, that his choice was autonomous and deeply considered. But Brooke refused to listen. Her pain eclipsed reason, her sense of betrayal too raw to allow nuance. To her, Eric's explanation sounded like retreat dressed up as reinvention. The confrontation escalated rapidly, drawing the full attention of the media. Questions flew, speculation erupted, and the narrative shifted from fashion innovation to family warfare. Brooke's declaration, that the battle between Logan and Forrester Creations had officially begun, crystallized the moment into a headline-ready conflict. What might have remained a private rift was now irrevocably public. Brooke framed the situation as a war of values rather than brands, positioning herself as a defender of legacy against what she perceived as exploitation. Steffi and Ridge watched the scene unfold with growing alarm. They recognized immediately the potential fallout, not just for Forrester Creations, but for the family name itself. The spectacle threatened to undermine consumer confidence, investor trust, and the carefully cultivated image of stability they had worked to restore. Ridge felt torn between anger and sorrow, aware that Eric's decision, though painful, was not malicious. Steffi, more pragmatic, focused on the optics. A public feud involving the Logan name, Eric Forrester, and a rival house was a narrative that could spiral beyond control. Behind the cameras, the damage was already taking shape. The Logan sisters' relationship fractured under the weight of accusation and exposure. Brooke felt justified in her outrage, convinced that silence would have equaled complicity. Katie, though shaken by the public escalation, refused to retreat. She had not sought confrontation, but she would not apologize for ambition. To her, Brooke's reaction confirmed a long-held truth, that any attempt to step outside the family's established hierarchy would be met with resistance framed as moral outrage. Eric found himself caught between two worlds, his decision recast as betrayal rather than evolution. The pressure intensified as Forrester family members questioned his loyalty, while the media dissected his motives with relentless curiosity. He had intended to create, not divide, yet division followed him nonetheless. Katie stood beside him publicly, her support unwavering, but privately she grappled with the cost of visibility. She had anticipated criticism from competitors, not condemnation from her own blood. The press seized upon the narrative with enthusiasm, framing the situation as a dramatic schism between two fashion dynasties bound by shared history and mutual resentment. Every statement was scrutinized, every silence interpreted. Brooke's passionate stance polarized opinion, casting her alternately as a betrayed matriarch or an obstructive force unwilling to relinquish control. Katie was depicted as either a visionary reclaiming her name or a strategist capitalizing on familial collapse. Eric became a symbol of generational transition, his choice debated as either courageous or destructive. As the fallout continued, the emotional consequences deepened. The Logan sisters, once united by survival and shared memory, now occupied opposing sides of a public battlefield. Conversations that might have healed wounds were replaced by press statements and legal consultations. The intimacy of sisterhood was lost to the distance imposed by pride and scrutiny. Each believed herself justified, yet both mourned the erosion of something irreplaceable. For Forrester Creations, the crisis demanded immediate response. Leadership meetings focused on containment and strategy, on reaffirming brand identity in the face of destabilizing headlines. Yet beneath the professional urgency lay unresolved grief. Eric's absence was felt not only in design direction, but in emotional cohesion. His legacy, once singular, was now split between houses, each claiming a piece of his vision. Eric and Katie faced mounting pressure from all sides. Supporters urged defiance, critics demanded retraction, and family members oscillated between disappointment and fury. Yet amid the chaos, Eric remained steadfast in his choice, believing that creative truth required courage even when it fractured familiarity. Katie, too, held her ground, determined that her identity would not be defined by others' expectations. The confrontation did not resolve neatly. It lingered, reshaping relationships and redefining alliances. The war Brooke declared was not merely between fashion houses, but between interpretations of loyalty, legacy, and self-determination. In the glare of media attention, private wounds became public spectacle, and the cost of ambition was measured not only in profit, but in blood ties strained to their limit. In the end, the battle lines remained drawn. Logan and Forrester Creations moved forward as rivals, their shared history both a burden and a weapon. Brooke stood firm in her belief that she was defending what mattered most. Katie embraced the consequences of her independence, even as she grieved what it cost. And Eric, caught between past and future, continued to create amid the wreckage, knowing that true reinvention often requires walking away from the very foundations that once defined you. The rumors did not arrive all at once. They crept in gradually, insinuating themselves into conversations that once felt safe, into professional circles that had long respected Taylor's boundaries, and into the quiet assumptions people made about Deacon's capacity for redemption. At first, the whispers were vague, framed as concern rather than accusation, but vagueness was precisely what made them dangerous. They suggested impropriety without naming it, intimacy without context, crossing of lines without evidence. For Taylor, whose career as a therapist depended not only on competence, but on perception, the damage was immediate and insidious. Her work had always required trust, an unspoken contract between healer and patient that relied on the belief that she understood boundaries, because she lived by them. Now that belief was under threat, eroded by gossip that painted her not as a professional woman navigating a complicated personal life, but as someone reckless enough to blur ethical lines for emotional fulfillment. The pressure mounted quickly. Colleagues became cautious, their tone shifting subtly when discussing cases. Referrals slowed. Professional boards did not issue formal complaints, but the absence of reassurance was its own warning. Taylor felt the change in the way rooms went quiet when she entered, in the careful neutrality of emails that once carried warmth. The relationship she had tried to compartmentalize, to live quietly and responsibly, was being reframed by others as a liability. Deacon, too, felt the weight of the scrutiny, though in a different way. His reputation had always been fragile, built slowly on accountability and consistency after years of mistakes. The idea that his presence in Taylor's life could undo her credibility cut deeply. He recognized the familiar pattern, chaos trailing him no matter how earnestly he tried to escape it. Steffi was the first to voice what others were only implying. Her concern was not subtle, nor was it softened by nostalgia or forgiveness. She spoke as a daughter and as a woman who understood how merciless public judgment could be. She reminded Taylor that professional ethics were not defined solely by intention, but by appearance and precedent. Finn echoed the concern with clinical clarity, outlining the real possibility of disciplinary action if the situation escalated. He spoke not as an adversary, but as someone who had seen careers dismantled by far less. The message was unmistakable: love, however sincere, did not exist in a vacuum, and Taylor's choice to remain involved with Deacon could cost her everything she had worked to rebuild. Taylor listened, torn between defensiveness and fear. She understood the logic of their warnings, yet recoiled at the implication that her personal life should be dictated by public comfort. Still, the threat was real. She had spent years reclaiming her sense of purpose, her stability, her professional identity after trauma and loss. The idea that all of it could be stripped away by rumor felt unbearable. She did not want to choose between love and livelihood, yet that was precisely the choice being forced upon her. Deacon's response surprised her. Instead of retreating, instead of suggesting distance or secrecy, he proposed the opposite. He argued that silence was feeding the speculation, that the absence of context allowed others to invent their own narratives. In his view, transparency was not recklessness but defense. He believed that acknowledging their relationship openly would strip the rumors of their power, reframing the story from scandal to honesty. Deacon spoke with conviction born of experience. He had lived in the shadows of half-truths before, and he knew how they metastasized. To him, standing openly beside Taylor was not just an act of love, but of accountability. Taylor resisted at first. The idea of exposing something so personal to public dissection filled her with dread. She had built her life on the principle that not everything needed to be explained, that privacy was not guilt. Yet as the days passed, the consequences of silence became harder to ignore. Each new article, each speculative headline, pushed her closer to the edge of professional collapse. She realized that what felt like protection was, in fact, abandonment of her own narrative. Reluctantly, painfully, she began to accept that confronting the storm directly might be the only way to survive it. The decision to hold a press conference was not made lightly. It came after sleepless nights, after long conversations that circled the same fears and hopes, after moments when Taylor considered walking away entirely to preserve what little stability remained. Deacon never pressured her, but he made his position clear: whatever the outcome, he would stand beside her. That constancy, more than any argument, tipped the balance. Taylor agreed not because she believed exposure would be kind, but because she believed hiding would be fatal. The day of the press conference arrived with a weight that felt almost physical. Cameras lined the room, reporters buzzing with anticipation, the air thick with the promise of spectacle. Taylor stood at the podium with Deacon at her side, acutely aware that this moment would redefine how the world saw her. She spoke carefully, deliberately, addressing the rumors without embellishment or defensiveness. She affirmed the reality of their relationship, acknowledged the scrutiny it invited, and asserted her commitment to professional ethics with unwavering clarity. Deacon followed, speaking not as a man seeking absolution, but as one claiming responsibility. He emphasized consent, transparency, and mutual respect, refusing to allow the narrative to reduce Taylor to a victim or himself to a catalyst. The reactions were immediate and polarized. Some praised the honesty, framing it as courageous in a culture addicted to secrecy. Others condemned the choice as reckless, questioning whether public acknowledgement truly absolved ethical concerns. Brooke's reaction was swift and visceral. She felt blindsided, interpreting the announcement as a betrayal not only of family unity, but of unspoken agreements about discretion. Rich shared her outrage, seeing the move as a provocation that endangered the fragile equilibrium of their blended family. They confronted Taylor and Deacon privately, their anger fueled by fear masked as indignation. Yet even in their fury, they recognized that the decision had already been made, that intervention now would only deepen the divide. While the family grappled with the fallout, another presence lurked just beyond the frame. Sheila, ever attuned to shifts in power and exposure, sensed that something significant was being concealed from her. The public confirmation did not soothe her, it enraged her. In her mind, the narrative excluded her deliberately, erasing her relevance. When fragments of truth reached her, distorted but unmistakable, her reaction was explosive. The realization that Deacon and Taylor had united publicly, effectively fortifying themselves against manipulation, ignited a fury rooted in abandonment and entitlement. Sheila interpreted their transparency not as honesty, but as defiance. Her response was immediate and dangerous. She began inserting herself into the situation, exploiting legal ambiguities and public concern to regain leverage. She hinted at past transgressions, threatened exposure of unrelated secrets, and attempted to reframe herself as a wronged party seeking justice. The legal complications escalated quickly, drawing Deacon and Taylor into a maze of accusations and counterclaims that threatened to overshadow the original issue entirely. Yet this time, the dynamic was different. Taylor and Deacon faced the chaos together, united not only by affection, but by a shared understanding of what was at stake. Taylor's resolve hardened under pressure. She refused to allow Sheila's tactics to dictate her choices, drawing clear boundaries reinforced by legal counsel and professional support. Deacon, too, confronted Sheila without flinching, no longer willing to negotiate with fear. Their unity became a source of strength, transforming what might have been a vulnerability into a defense. The legal battles were exhausting, the scrutiny relentless, but they endured, anchored by the certainty that retreat would only validate the narrative they were fighting to dismantle. In the weeks that followed, the professional fallout began to stabilize. Taylor's licensing board reviewed the situation with rigor, ultimately concluding that transparency and adherence to ethical standards outweighed the speculative nature of the complaints. The decision did not erase the damage, but it preserved her ability to practice, a victory hard-won and deeply personal. Deacon's reputation, though still contested, benefited from the consistency of his actions. He did not disappear under pressure, nor did he deflect blame. He remained present, accountable, and unwavering. The relationship between Taylor and Deacon emerged altered but intact. The ordeal stripped away illusions, replacing them with a clarity forged through adversity. They understood now that love did not protect against consequence, but it could provide the resilience needed to face it. Their choice to stand publicly was not a declaration of perfection, but a refusal to be defined by rumor or fear. The family dynamics remained fractured, trust strained by the shock of the announcement and the subsequent chaos. Brooke and Ridge struggled to reconcile their protective instincts with Taylor's autonomy, their anger slowly giving way to reluctant respect for her resolve. Healing, if it came, would be incremental and imperfect. In the end, the press conference marked more than the confirmation of a relationship. It marked a shift in power, a reclaiming of narrative from those who thrived on distortion. Deacon and Taylor did not emerge unscathed, but they emerged aligned, their bond tempered by fire rather than consumed by it. The rumors lost their sharpness, the legal threats diminished, and what remained was the quiet, enduring work of rebuilding in the aftermath of exposure.